Hello, YouTube. This story is virtually unknown in the West, among the civilians, of course, and it's a sad story because to perish aboard a submarine, I think it may be one of the worst ways to go. But I'd like to tell you this story and just to make sure you understand that it all comes from open sources, but what really happened, I don't think we'll know for a long time, if ever. But let me tell you what I know. During the Cold War, the confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States took place, including, of course, underwater. It is not surprising that after the collision of the Soviet K-10 nuclear-powered vessel with a certain object, there was no doubt that the American submarine was to blame. Later, however, it turned out that a Chinese submarine was accidentally damaged. The incident occurred at the end of January 1983 at a depth of 54 meters. I'll tell you the generally known version of this story in Russia, but then I will tell you it from another angle, from the point of view and knowledge of a Russian journalist who covered such matters. So, captain of the first rank, Valery Medvedev, who commanded the K-10 on the orders of his superiors, decided to conduct a maneuver to check the absence of tracking. Foreigners call this maneuver Mad Ivan. The essence of such a maneuver is that the submarine turns sharply and begins to follow the reverse course for some time. This is done in order to discern those who are, using Russian naval slang, sitting on the tail of the submarine. At the same time, such a check was required periodically, even if there were no suspicions of surveillance. That day there was such a case. Mad Ivan was performed only because it's necessary. Suddenly, the Soviet submariners felt a sharp jolt, then a rather strong blow that shook the hull of the ship. After the accident, Captain Medvedev gave the order to raise the alarm and seal the first three compartments. At 21 hours and 31 minutes, the vessel was in a surface position. After examining the adjacent water area and the periscope, no information was received about what happened earlier. The captain decided to return to the place where the impact occurred. However, the Soviet submarine was a little late. All that the navigator and the signalman observed was the orange flashing light of the retreating submarine. The sailors on the K-10 could observe such a picture for 40 seconds. It did not work out who was conducting a surveillance that year. No nation had reported accidents in the Pacific region. A few years later, a small article appeared in a Chinese newspaper. Its authors mentioned the death of compatriots during the testing of an underwater vessel. The Chinese authorities preferred not to link the incident with their submarine and the Soviet K-10. But there is no doubt that the Soviet submarine collided with the Chinese one. And here's why. The authorities of the People's Republic of China, in accordance with the decree of government of the USSR of January 9, 1959, received from the neighboring state working drawings and technical documentation on the project of submarines 629. The first of them was laid down at the Dalian shipyard in the autumn of 1960. The Chinese worked at a rapid pace. Also, largely thanks to the Soviet assistance, the first Chinese submarine was launched at the end of 1961. The vessel received tail number 200. By about the same time, another ship was ready in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, which was soon transported to China in parts. Now, in the Middle Kingdom, as China is called, it was assigned the number 208. Their task was to test the Chinese ballistic missile JL-1. 2 years after the incident with the K-1, it became known that the Chinese vessel number 208 With the entire crew and a group of scientists and engineers on board, more than 100 people perished during the tests. But the Chinese leadership has not officially linked the collision of the Soviet submarine with the deaths of its own. It's possible that due to the unwillingness to attract the attention of the world community to their underwater activities. Well, Russian journalist Pasko had a very interesting meeting in the year 2012 with the former captain of the K-10 submarine Valery Nikolaevich Medvedev. Obninsk is a town near Moscow. So the journalist came to an ordinary apartment with ordinary furnishings. Paintings on the walls depicted the sea and the submarines. And the sailor, it showed that the sailor's family lives there. A thick piece of metal can be seen on the coffee table, part of the casing of a durable hull. It is clear that the commander was preparing for a meeting with the journalist, Valery Nikolaevich, in an officer's uniform. That's how he came out. So the journalist thought, is it for the courage? To begin with, they wanted to recall that the collision of K1 with some other submarine was neither the first nor the last. If you list all the underwater collisions, you may get the impression that the world ocean is steaming with submarines, floating in it like a minestrone soup with boiled vegetables. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of such examples. Accidents and catastrophes, as a rule, were not described in the world newspapers. During the Cold War and even after, it was customary to classify everything. And then there was no internet and WikiLeaks at the time. And sailors, by force of habit, are not inclined to stir up the past. But even though it is very late, the truth is coming out, wrote down Pasko. So, an oily spot pops up, signaling that an accident has occurred somewhere in the depths of the sea. And only the short-sighted will shrug off looking at this spot. The truth is not needed to dig into an old wound. It is needed to at least learn lessons and prevent a repeat of the tragedy. Pasko's friend, a submariner, now retired, Anatoly Safonov, wrote on this website the following: Captain of the first rank, Valery Medvedev, is a patriot of his country, which he selflessly served all his life. He showed his love for the motherland in an exemplary performance of official duties. It looks like a line from a Communist Party characteristic. But according to Safonov himself, who is not inclined either to sentimentality or to great respect for the Communist Party and political bodies, these words are fair and accurate in relation to Medvedev. The only thing that did not stick with Safonov in the exemplary characterization of the brave sailor was the dumb question of history. Why was he silent for so long and did not dare to tell the truth about what happened? Looking ahead, Pasko will note, it seemed to him that during their conversation, Valery Nikolaevich Medvedev did not say everything. So, a short, sturdy pensioner, retired military officer, was sitting in front of the Russian journalist. He spoke softly, not the way commanders usually speak in the Navy. Valery Nikolaevich recalled, on January 22nd, 1983, K-10 was in the South China Sea. Combat service went on as usual, and as they write in such cases, nothing foreshadowed trouble. The depth under the keel was 4,500 meters. Submariners are joking, it's like 5 minutes by bus. It was Saturday. After the personnel of the submarine watched a feature film in the first compartment. The area designated for communication was approached 8 hours earlier than the deadline. The territory itself had to be entered at a strictly appointed time. Commander Medvedev decided to check the absence of tracking by the anti-submarine forces of the United States and Japan. When turning to the reverse course, he received the relevant reports from the hydroacoustic techs. Everything was clean. The diving depth is 54 meters. Suddenly there was a jolt, a feeling as if the boat had collided with some kind of obstacle. The blow was soft but powerful. The entire hull of the submarine shuddered violently from the collision. The K-10, as if grappling with an unknown object, moved with it for some time. Then they uncoupled. An emergency alarm was immediately announced. The first three forward compartments were sealed together with the people in them. Over the loudspeaker, Medvedev requested the first compartment. In response, there was silence, deafening silence. One can imagine the feelings of the commander at these moments. Meanwhile, the submarine was on its course and at the given depth with a slight drop in speed. The trim on the nose slightly increased. Medvedev said, "I was constantly requesting the first compartment. From the impact of the collision, the sailors probably got a lot of stress. It was necessary to find out the situation. After 2 minutes, which seemed to me an eternity, a report passed from the first compartment. The compartment is airtight. At 21 hours and 31 minutes, they surfaced in the surface position. A typhoon was raging over the sea. The monstrous force of the wind and huge waves threw the submarine like a small chip. The nights in those latitudes are dark. Maybe that's why. Examining the sea through periscope optics, Medvedev, according to him, saw nothing. He gave the command to return to the point of collision. Arriving there, he, the navigator, and the signalman observed the orange flashing light of the retreating submarine. After about 30 to 40 seconds, the light disappeared. Medvedev repeated several times, "This is the first time I'm talking about the flashing lights of the submarine I have seen." Valery Nikolaevich fell silent. Apparently, he was remembering those difficult moments. He mentally returned to that area hundreds of times and tried to figure out which submarine the collision occurred with. He came to the conclusion that it was with the Chinese one, and here's why. In accordance with the decree of the government of the USSR in the year 1959, working drawings and technical documentation for Project 629 with the D1 complex with R-11FM missiles were prepared in the Central Design Bureau 16 from March to December 1959 for their transfer to the People's Republic of China. By the autumn of 1960, the first of the Chinese Project 629 submarines was laid at the shipyard in Dalian, in China, formerly Russian Dalny. To accelerate its construction, Soviet designs were widely used, as well as equipment and mechanisms from the K-139 submarine, launched in May 1960. The construction of the Chinese submarine was completed at the end of 1961 and received the tail number 200. At the same time, a submarine under the factory number 138 was laid in Komsomolsk-on-Amur. After construction, the ship was transported in parts to China and commissioned at the end of 1962 under the number 208. Later, 2 years after the K-10 incident, it became known that in 1983, this Chinese submarine number 208 perished with the entire crew and a group of scientists and engineers during the tests of the Chinese JL-1 ballistic missile. Considering that the Project 629 submarines have a crew of about 100 people and that there was also a group of civilian specialists, we can only assume the exact number of victims. It is noteworthy that the Chinese side has not officially linked the collision with the demise of this boat. Now we can say with almost absolute certainty that the submarine of the People's Republic of China was destroyed as a result of a collision with the K-1. If the Soviet K-10, if the K-10 submarine had been at the collision point 5 seconds earlier, it might have been lying at the depth of 4,500 meters now. Medvedev, of course, immediately reported the collision to the Fleet Command. In response, he was ordered to proceed in a surface position to the Cam Ranh base located in South Vietnam. They were escorted by the approaching large anti-submarine ship Petropavlovsk. When examining the submarine for this purpose, a trim was created on the stern. It turned out that its bow had several severe damage. Pieces of foreign metal were found among the mangled bow of the K-10. The keel steel track K-10 with a thickness of 30 millimeters and a length of about 32 meters was cut off like a razor during the collision. After inspecting the submarine, the Fleet Command decided that in an emergency condition it could overcome the 4,500 kilometers to the main base in an underwater position, forcing the passage of Bashi, Okinawa, and the Korean Strait in a surface position. Of course, it was almost madness with such damage and to sail in an underwater position. But an order is an order without acoustic stations, almost by touch. But those 4,500 kilometers passed normally. Medvedev was confident in his crew, and the crew did not let their commander down. For such a transition in different situation, the sailors would have been rewarded, but not this time. This time, the commander-in-chief of the USSR Navy, Gorshkov, announced a penalty to Medvedev. By themselves, not only the details of that case come up, but also questions: how could this happen? Complex hydrology in the area, poor capabilities of hydroacoustic stations, poor preparation of hydroacoustics, the presence of so-called blind or dead zones. Why did the crew of the People Republic of China submarine make the same mistakes? It is known that there was an investigation of the causes of the accident by specialists of the Commission of Technical Management of the Pacific Fleet and the Navy. Why in this case even the submariners of the Soviet Pacific Fleet did not know about it? There is an opinion of a participant in those events. Alexander Bragorsky served on the K-10, and on that day he was acting as a mechanical engineer on duty. Here's what he wrote to the journalist Pasko. As far as I remember, and a lot of time has passed, we started circulating to the left and a blow followed, that is a collision. So they, the Chinese, they were sitting on our tail, or it's a fatal accident, which I don't believe. The world ocean is too big for such accidents. Why didn't the Chinese figure out maneuver, that is the circulation? God only knows. Most likely they had poorly prepared sonar. As far as Pasko knows, when tracking submarines, for submarines, the depths should be different and there should be a certain distance to the object so that in case of anything, it would be possible to have time to make an anti-maneuver. But this did not happen that time. 2 grains of sand met in the boundless depths. It's just a phenomenon of some kind. Upon arrival in Cam Ranh, members of the Soviet State Commission were already waiting for the command of the K-10. They did not let them go to the pier. They anchored them. A boat with members of the commission and divers came up. No one was allowed up. The specialists examined everything. The findings of the inspection were not reported to the crew and command of the submarine. Medvedev seems to have been crushed by the academy. They did not give him the rank of the captain of the first rank and reprimanded on behalf of the commander-in-chief of the Navy. After returning to Pavlovsk, they began to cut out the mutilated torpedo tubes, the covers of which were torn off at the moment of the impact, and there were torpedoes with nuclear weapons, nuclear ammunition. After talking with some other submariners, it turned out that the senior on board the K-10 was the chief of staff of the 29-1 division of the submarine, Captain Second Rank Krylov. After the collision of the submarines, an employee of the Special Department, which means Naval Counterintelligence, arrested the logs of the Central Post and of the navigator. Krylov had a long conversation with the special agent. As a result of a private conversation, it was decided to rewrite these logs. They even rewrote the log of the main power plant because the high-speed mode of the submarine, when following to the combat duty area, was severely violated, and the boat arrived in the area 3 hours earlier than it should have. It was impossible to enter the duty area earlier. That's why they hung around there until they ran into the Chinese. And here's the opinion of the former commander of the submarine, Viktor Bondarenko, with whom Pasko met there in Obninsk. Valery Nikolaevich Medvedev did everything right. Why he approached the area earlier at 8 o'clock, apparently, there were some reasons for this, but these are his problems. The bad thing is that there are no time parameters. When they collided, when they returned to the collision site, what were the speeds, etc. Tracking a Chinese diesel, the Chinese diesel submarine tracking behind the nuclear-powered vessel, only an amateur can reason like that. The Chinese conducted the next stage of testing. The crew has not been worked out. They are generally forbidden to be distracted by unusual tasks, except for the tests. Even if they found the Soviet nuclear-powered ship, they had to radio it to the shore and continue their work. What the submariners had in common was that, according to their technical characteristics, they had almost identical acoustic stations. The crew on the K-10 trained and was trained, and the maneuver to check the aft course angles is very responsible, and the acoustics are very attentive to this. So let's think. Once the submarines collided, it means that they were at the same depth, 54 meters. Further, Medvedev said that at that time a storm was raging upstairs, so to say, on the surface, and if so, that the noises of both submarines were masked by the noises of the sea. In this situation, even good acoustics and excellent sonar will not distinguish the noise of a submarine from the noise of the sea. This is an axiom. Medvedev noted that after surfacing, he saw an orange flashing light. So the Chinese submarine also surfaced. And why it sank after that is a question. If it did not sink after the collision but surfaced and then sunk, then this is completely incomprehensible. It means that they did something wrong, because there are no miracles. If everything was so difficult, then after the collision, they would have gone to the bottom like a stone. So Valery Nikolaevich Medvedev has no need to blame it all on himself. In 1981, a collision of Soviet and American nuclear submarines took place at one of the ranges of the Northern Fleet near the Kola Bay. Then the American submarine, with its wheelhouse, rammed the aft part of the Soviet's newest strategic missile submarine K-211, which had just joined the Northern Fleet and was practicing elements of combat training. The American submarine did not surface in the collision area, but a few days later, a U.S. nuclear submarine with pronounced damage to the wheelhouse appeared in the area of the British naval base Holy Loch. Soviet submarine surfaced and came to the base on its own. A commission consisting of specialists from the Navy, industry, science, and the designer, this commission was waiting for the submarine there. The commission, having modeled the situation of the maneuver of the two submarines, having examined the damaged sites, found that the American submarine was watching the Russian one in its aft sectors, remaining in the acoustic shadow for it. As soon as the Soviet submarine changed course, the American one lost contact and blindly crashed its wheelhouse into the stern of the Russian submarine. It was put into dock, and there, during the inspection, holes were found in two aft tanks of the main ballast, damage to the blades of the right propeller and the horizontal stabilizer. Bolts with countersunk heads, pieces of metal, and plaques from the wheelhouse of the American submarine were found in the damaged tanks of the main ballast. Moreover, according to some details, the Commission was able to establish that the collision occurred with an American Sturgeon-class submarine, which was later confirmed by the appearance in Holy Loch of a submarine with damaged conning tower of this class. Projecting this case into the case of a collision with a Chinese submarine, one involuntarily comes to the hypothesis that these notorious aft sectors with acoustic shadows could have been the cause of the collision. One can also recall another case, the collision of the Sierra-class nuclear submarine, Northern Fleet, with the Baton Rouge nuclear submarine, U.S. Navy, on February 11, 1992. The Russian nuclear torpedo submarine, presumably it was K-239 Karp, was located in a combat training range near the Rybachi Peninsula in the territorial waters of Russia. The submarine was commanded by the captain of the second rank, Loktev. The submarine sailed at the depth of 22.8 meters. The American nuclear-powered vessel was tracking its Russian brother, following at a depth of about 15 meters. In the process of maneuvering, the acoustics of the American submarine lost contact with the Sierra, and since there were 5 fishing vessels in the area, the noise of the screws of which is similar to the noise of the screws of the submarine, the commander of the Baton Rouge decided at 20 hours 8 minutes to float to periscope depth and understand the situation. The Russian sub at that moment turned out to be lower than the American one and also began surfacing to conduct a communication session with the shore. And there was the collision of submarines. During the collision, the Sierra rammed the bottom of the American submarine with its wheelhouse. Only the low speed of the Russian sub and the shallow depth when surfacing allowed the American submarine to avoid death. This is an example of seemingly randomness, but accidents in the area, as you know, do not happen. Statistics show that from 1968 to the year 2000, there were about 25 collisions of foreign submarines, mostly American, with Soviet and Russian submarines in an underwater position. Of these, 12 are near Russian shores on the approaches to the main nuclear submarine bases. On the northern 9 collisions and Pacific fleets 3 collisions. As a rule, incidents occurred in combat training ranges where submarines, after changing part of the crew, work out the tasks of the combat training course. According to the Defense Express Research Center, 7 cases of nuclear submarines sinking have been recorded in the history of the fleet. 2 American, Thresher and Scorpion, and 5 Soviet, K-8, K-219, K-278, Komsomolets, K-27, and the Kursk submarine. 4 nuclear submarines of the USSR were lost in an accident, and 1 was sunk in the Kara Sea by the decision of the responsible government departments due to the impossibility of restoration and the high cost of disposal. In most cases, if it was not possible to determine the exact causes of the demise of any submarine, the perpetrators preferred to deny their involvement in this, and sometimes, even despite the obvious evidence, using the good old principle, if you are not caught, you are not a thief. One day, Pasko met with the U.S. naval attaché in Russia, short, sturdy, with a bunch of award bars on a snow-white uniform shirt. He seemed to radiate joy from his successful life. straightened shoulders, in fact, demonstrated this joy. It turned out that he was a former commander of a Los Angeles class nuclear submarine. I was a commander for 4 years already, he said with genuine pride. Just think, 4 years, Pasko replied. We have 8 to 9 years as commanders. The American looked at the Russian journalist with disbelief, but Pasko called a friend of the admiral, who also a former commander of the submarine, and asked him to confirm his words. And the friend confirmed it. The American was very surprised. How? He could not believe until the very end, because I know how hard it is. 8 years, it's impossible. Well, yes, well, as the saying goes, let me rephrase it so it sounds good for the English here, so to say. What for the German, or American in this case, is a deathly dangerous thing to do, then it is something quite possible for a Russian to do. And Pasko remembered Medvedev, who was the commander of the submarine for 9 years. The retired pensioner, Medvedev, he looked good during their meeting, but his shoulders at the moments of their conversation about the prestige of the service were not wide from the sense of pride. Pasko remembered that well as the fact that something the former commander, he remembered that the former commander did not tell him something about the collision. So what I also am interested in is that why someone issued fake official document, a report from Medvedev about this incident. It looks real, but under close investigation conducted in Russia by qualified civilians, it turns out to be a fake, maybe even a little bit crude. Why create such a fake? Who knows? I want to bring something else into this conversation, so to say. I want you to look at my videos about USOs, unidentified submersible objects, in the Far East, including the sea that we mentioned and other seas in the area, like I said, in the Far East. Not the Arctic this time. And you will see a history of very interesting incidents and disappearances of submarines and so forth. And not only the Russian ones. I think you will find it interesting. And who knows? Who knows what was the cause of the demise of the Chinese submarine? And again, it's. I hope people would have not have died in the submarines, whatever nation they belong to. It's a horrible death to go, but human beings like to fight. So what can you do? But the secrets of the demise of the Chinese submarine remain concealed at the bottom of the ocean or sealed archives, and I don't think we will get to find out what's in them. So this is what I wanted to let you know. And again, I urge you to look at my other videos about the unidentified submersible objects and strange incidents in the Far Sea as well. And maybe you'll learn a few interesting things. If you like my research and you can support me in my research, you will find ways how to do it in the description to this video. Please tell others about my channel, and I'll bring you more interesting stories about the underwater accidents, civilizations, meetings, encounters, and so forth. Thank you.